So, are we ready to go? Can I get started? All right. Hi, my name is Bridget Kromhout. Some of you know me. Some of you have worked with me before. Some of you taught me to play NetHack. Curse you. You know, low these 20 years ago. Oh, God. Today I'm here to talk to you about monitoring. I'm guessing that some of you probably, in all of the talk tracks here where you're supposed to pick things that are development, design, startup, and other, most of you are like, huh, there's no ops track. Okay, other it is. Are there a lot of ops people in this given group? Interesting, some sortas. Mostly developers. Developers.
Ops wannabe.
Exactly. What are people who don't consider themselves to be developers or ops? What audience am I talking to in that context? If you're not developer and you're not ops, what are you? Product manager. Ah, so you actually care if the thing is up and working. Exactly. Okay, so a little bit of background. I work at a company called EighthBridge this week. We were just acquired by a company called Fluid out of San Francisco. And they're going to keep us in Minneapolis. No one is going to make me move to California, which is awesome. I said in the other panel earlier, but I'll repeat it because it bears repeating, that what you say to the Bay Area recruiters when they try is you explain snow is a feature, not a bug. Because they do try. They'll send you the mail in February. So I noticed that you're in Minnesota. Would you like to come to California and interview? And you're like, this is snowshoe season. What are you talking about? But anyway, so EighthBridge, now a Fluid company, is, hey, look at that. I have slides. I could use my slides, or I could just talk to you, you know. But we're a small social commerce startup, and we, because we are a small startup, that means we have no money. Well, except we just got bought by a company who had enough money to buy us, so there's that. So maybe in this exciting new future, we'll have more than one ops person, which would be great. Of course, I'm with a fantastic dev team who a lot of them are also on call. And except for, I think, there's one front-end gentleman who has so far escaped being on call, but I'm trying to talk him into it. I've got him, you know, running chef himself and all this stuff, so we'll see. But anyway, so when you're working in this kind of environment, you look at stuff like, say, when I got there, we were actually, well, I'll get to that. But you look at all of the exciting things like, say, Appsmatic, and you're like, Datadog, you know, you're like, I would love to sign up for that. We can't afford it. So we're going to be rolling our own, and that'll probably suck. It doesn't have to suck, and there are some ways you can maybe make it not suck. You can avoid at least some of the horrible mistakes I've made. Okay, so when I got there, when I got to EighthBridge, and I'm really sad that Jamie Thingelstead can't be in this talk because the scheduling algorithm scheduled the minibar on minibar talk opposite this. And I was like, crap, I couldn't give Jamie shit at the, I'm not supposed to swear, sorry. Okay, I helped get the idea for the code of conduct going, so apologies to anyone who was offended by me swearing. I am an ops person, so you know. There was a twisty maze of shell scripts, as always happens at the start. In the beginning, there was the twisty maze of shell scripts when I got there, and I was like, and I write things in Bash on purpose, and I write all of my, you know, Buffy fan fiction or whatever in VI. So I'm not afraid of shell scripts, but you look at that and you go, oh. Yeah, the cron job, that its job was to go and look and see if it needed to give itself a new cron tab. What? Okay. So you start with that and you think, how do I move away from this into something a little bit less crazy? Well, when I got there, again, they had something else too. They had NewRelic, which is lovely and not perfect. And are any of you using NewRelic now? Using it for your alerting? Does it alert you on things that you don't want to be alerted? Yeah, Jeremy is giving me this yes. Okay, so it is nice. It's certainly great to look and see that your memcache layer is taking up more, is a little more active there than you expect it to be. Gee, what's going on there? On the other hand, at the time we had Ticketmaster as a client, and when Eastern European scalpers decided that they really wanted those pink tickets and started hitting the Facebook app, and NewRelic would blow up with a whole bunch of non-actionable alerts because our error rate would go up. And it's not actionable, and it's not even a real problem except for the people who are trying to scalp on something that they shouldn't be. That's the sort of thing where it is a good tool, but maybe it is not the best tool to have it doing your monitoring and alerting. So, and at the time, I was kind of tasked with the what of all of the various things, we know we can't turn off everything in EC2, but what of all of the various services can we possibly make less expensive? And I looked at the NewRelic bill and went, oh my God. They do have better, in NewRelic's defense, they have better pricing now, apparently. They don't have like, hundreds of dollars per host, which at the time was crazy. So this is a dramatic reenactment of what my sleep was like on call some time back because I didn't have a jawbone up then. But just imagine your typical on-call. And the fine folks at Opsmatic actually have something on their website that's hilarious where they talk about the mean time between lost sleep. And they say, if any of you have seen that, that's pretty great. And they say, being on call shouldn't be like having a newborn. So if anybody, a lot of my coworkers, I don't have any newborns in my life, but unless you count that brand new MapReduce v2 cluster, which does its own share of waking me up in the night. But if any of you have ever had a newborn in your life or known someone who has, I'm sure at least some of you would say yes to that, and you know exactly what that's like. So you don't want your on-call to be like that, but you also, I talked to some people at the pre-party yesterday who said that their solution to NewRelic waking them up in the night for non-actionable alerts was to set their phone to do not disturb between 11 and 7. And I said, well, that is a solution. There's seats. Josh, you don't have to sit on the floor. There's seats. There's a seat right here in the middle. There are seats right along here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make room for Josh, come on. All right, so we can all agree we don't want that kind of sleep. This is actually real, but I think I probably have H-base to blame for that. There's an Australian gentleman who calls it H-base, and I kept hearing that as hate base, and I was like, yes. But anyway, so if you don't want to be in this kind of situation, but you also don't think that turning off your phone at night is going to solve your problems, well, what do? Okay, you're all going to cringe because, yes, you remember Nagios, you hate it, we all hate it because it's Nagios. It's horrible to configure. I mean, it's not horrible to configure if you remember SendMail, right? But it's, or for a more modern context, if you've spent any time with MapReduce clusters, and what was it, somebody said about Hadoop and HBase, the whole Hadoop HBase Zookeeper ecosystem, that the one thing they don't suffer from is a lack of configurability. And I was like, yes. They don't suffer from that. But, okay, Nagios, it's a pain to configure. And I hate looking at it so much that this is actually a slide from my MongoDB talk last year. So any of you who came to that, sorry, I'm reusing the slide. But I just didn't even want to go make a Nagios slide. But anyway, so I set up Nagios, as one does. And I kind of hated myself for it. And I've been kind of going through this, existential angst of what should I replace it with because there's all this new shiny. And there was actually a very interesting discussion on Twitter that if you didn't follow, and some of you are nodding because you followed this one, but if you didn't follow this discussion, I strongly recommend going and reading Lori's blog post. I have the specific link to it up there. And I liked his take on the interface. Yes, that is what it looks like. Yeah, you can read that. So. I don't know how well the video can pick that up, but yes, it is hideous. On the bright side, everything is the same place that you left it because it's been the same way since 1912, give or take a few years. But isn't there, competing school of thought because time began in 1970, right? So I don't know. But anyway, so it actually works. This is not a you should go use Nagios. This is a you don't have to go pick the newest, shiniest tool that exists just because it's new and shiny. For example, I did look at Sensu. I didn't install it because it terrified me, because I've used RabbitMQ. And the idea of having that, or as Lori put it in his excellent blog post, which you should read, the idea of having something where you need 7 different colors of arrows to tell you where the data is going, to tell if your monitoring system is going to work. Yeah, the gentleman who I don't even know, but I'm going to have to go follow him now because that's an excellent quote, basically made the point that, would you feel comfortable having that waking you up in the night? With nothing to watch it? Who watches The Watchmen, right? Okay, so anyway, a good example of the sort of thing that you can do with Nagios, where you look at Nagios and you're like, it's so, ugh. But composability. This is the VI versus Emacs fight, right? I'm in the VI camp, just for the record. But I respect people who use Emacs. I don't hate y'all. People who use IDEs. Atom, I don't understand Atom. Everyone I've talked to who's actually used it says it makes their workflow slower. So I was like, really? For example, say you're deciding that you're going to use Hadoop and HBase, and the HBase portion is significantly less stable than the Hadoop portion, just so you know. You probably know if you've done that. But anyway, say you want to do that. Yes, you could monitor zillions upon zillions of ports. And you could look at all of the Java barfy stack traces that you want to, because Java likes to be so verbose to tell you that whatever. But you can just point something, add a bash script, parse the output of the HBase consistency checker. That will tell you if HBase is broken. So this is the sort of thing, and I started Googling that. You know what? There's a lot of stuff out there. This guy uses Isinga. But fortunately, compatibility, I could modify his check. It doesn't do exactly everything I want to do. And sidebar, rant. There are many sidebars and rants, just so you know. So this is going to be like John Carlos's scheme class with cars and kudadadadadars. Sidebar rant. Why, Amazon? Talking to you, Amazon. Why did you have to change your default AMI for EMR to be Amazon Linux, which is CentOS, when it was perfectly good Debian before? And I had to go change our entire bootstrap. So thanks a lot. And I also did have to change the script because, of course, temp file does not exist. Make temp, whatever. But anyway, so again, the composability of just sticking all your pieces together does work. So this is my, even if you don't want to get into the plugin wars, which, you know, yeah, Nagios has some crazy stuff going on in the community, but even if you don't want to get into that, before you jump into either hosted or some sort of crazy tool with, you know, uses everything in the kitchen sink, at least consider some of the tools that we have been using for a while. The reason we still use them is they do work. And then once I got Nagios set up, I started adding alert after alert after alert, as one does. The developers kind of hated that for a little while because, again, I'm in the on-call rotation with developers. And yes, nobody wants to wake up in the night. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats that aren't near each other. But if people want to slide together, maybe people who are standing could actually, you know. Anyway, train of thought, what was I talking about? Oh yes, the law of Murphy for DevOps. You can see that tragically there I am not following DevOps Warrant. I probably should be, but I feel like I don't need to because everyone I know seems to retweet the funny things that DevOps Warrant says, so it's like, I'll just follow them. And if you're starting to get the idea that I mostly put this talk together by thinking of the funny things people have been saying on Twitter, sure, I did. Because you know what? When we're not here in this room looking at or talking to each other, we're probably on Twitter talking to each other, so let's just be realistic. Yes, I'm talking to, I see you in real life, mostly just on Twitter. You are actually a person. You're not just Jaw6. Though you should follow Jaw6. He is awesome. And also retweets awesome things. But anyway, so I probably went crazy adding too many alerts. And that is the sort of thing that can make your developers not love you. So again, something like, I can't speak to all of the other tools out there, but something like Nagios, you can certainly go set up various service groups. I soon learned that every new alert, I would just have it send email to me first so I could see if it was going to all over the place. Because yeah, it is sort of tempting to have an alert for absolutely everything ever, but you do not want to train yourself and everyone else to just start filtering all of the alerts. Because then you're just back where you started, only, you know, your Gmail filters or whatever are working overtime. And if you happen to be using something that we are called MongoDB, for example, there are alerting tools that Tengen, well, they changed their name to Mongo, and you know, Opsco changed their name to Chef. Next, we're going to hear Amazon's changing their name to Cloud. I'm assuming, right? I mean, this is the trend: is you just change your name to whatever. But anyway, so like for example, I went out there and found a Nagios plugin that did the monitoring of Mongo that we didn't have, but really, really needed. Because again, when you have no visibility into your infrastructure, because again, we had the tangled mass of shell scripts that did things, stuff, reasons, and then we had NewRelic telling us that our application had errors. But when we added the, when I added the Mongo like monitoring, so that say we would actually know if the index sizes, one problem that you end up with MongoDB, if you ever choose to use MongoDB, and I can't recommend that you should, but if you ever choose to use MongoDB, be aware that you want your entire active working set, or at least all your indexes, to fit in memory. And if your indexes start to grow bigger than memory, what does the ski instructor on South Park say? You're going to have a bad time. So anyway, so I went and found this plugin that didn't actually do what I needed to do. And then I had the exciting crisis of conscience. And yes, I'm going to go to the imposter kitten slide because I actually contributed my first time to an open source project. And it's the sort of thing where, because I had to write it anyway because I needed it, and then I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to go to hell if I don't give this to people. And also, I think the GPL has something to say about this. But it was terrifying. And the thing is, if you're like, I've been a Gentoo committer for 15 years or however long it is, right? But if you've been doing that forever, it's hard to remember what it's like to submit your first pull request and wonder if they're going to laugh at it or tell you that you must refactor to meet their style or tell you that this doesn't work when you're like, well, I know it works because I wrote this and I'm using it and it makes our monitoring better. But anyway, it is scary. So those of you who are maintainers, try to remember there always is going to be that one person who wants to, contribute something to your project, but feels scared. So getting an answer quickly, and even if it had been no, sorry, you have to make this change, getting an answer quickly was really nice. It made me feel a lot less terrified. Anyway, there is, for Mongo, for example, there is another monitoring tool, the one that MongoDB gives you, and it measures and lets you graph a whole bunch of stuff, and it isn't always necessarily going to be the stuff that you want, which is why we sort of started ignoring it, and this would be the not invented here hubris of, I hand-rolled all of this stuff, and it's so much better, and the stuff that 10gen's giving us is not going to really help. And then we had a little thing called the holidays. So we do social commerce for retail, and we were on the front page of a major retailer that sells things to people who want to buy things for their children. I think I can say that. So anyway, we had stuff on their front page, and yeah, I didn't like the word Cyber Monday before this year. Let's just put it that way. And if we'd been looking at MMS, or even alerting off of it, though the alerting off of it is not really that easy, but if we'd been looking at MMS, we would have seen the issue. We were having an issue because there was something fundamental about the way locking works in MongoDB that none of us on the team understood. Because all the documents call it the global write lock. You're nodding like you know what I'm talking about. Have you dealt with this? Yeah. So the global write lock is not a write lock. It's a read-write lock. So if you're, and it's database-wide. It's not server-wide, but it's database-wide. So if you have a collection that's, say, you're tracking, that's getting written to like crazy, and then you have another collection, say your product stuff that you're trying to show, and they're in the same database, it does not matter how fast your SSD instances from Amazon are, because your lock percentage is going to go crazy. And if you're not alerting on that, or you don't understand what you're looking at, or you're not looking at it, you're going to have a bad time. So yeah, that made that Monday longer than you want most Mondays to be. And our stuff was slower than we wanted it to be. We weren't down, but on the web, you may as well be down if you're taking seconds instead of milliseconds to respond. So that was a horrible disaster. That, again, if we had been paying some attention to the imperfect but did exist vendor tool, or if I had actually been setting up the monitoring in such a way that, but it's like you don't know what's wrong until it happens. And then you're like, no one can ever use shoes at the airport again, because that'll happen again. But anyway, so how do you solve that? If you don't know what's going to go wrong? Well, Etsy solves it by just measuring everything. Because if you can just measure everything, even the things that you don't think, I don't know if the contrast is good enough there to read that. Can people in the back read that? If it moves, we track it. Sometimes we'll draw a graph of something that isn't moving yet, just in case it decides to make a run for it. Is what Ian Malpass says in the excellent, these slides will be up afterwards so you can actually go follow all these links. I don't expect you to actually try to take a picture of that link and follow it, but you should go read everything I'm referencing because it's actually really good stuff. And this is the Coda's Craft blog post about their monitoring. And you're looking at this and you're thinking, clearly that sort of graphing was put together by people who feel passionately about time series data. Yes. Most people involved with Graphite are not design people, but you shouldn't dismiss it just because it's hideous. Like Nagios, it has some really useful stuff inside, and there are some drop-in replacements for the front end. So yeah, so I definitely want to highlight Graphite and StatsD. If these look a little different, it's because they are. I stole these slides from a talk that I gave at Infracoders some months ago. If none of you, by the way, come to the local DevOps meetup or Infracoders meetup, because infrastructure is code, yay. Or you should definitely, if you didn't come to my talk or my session before lunch, come to DevOps Days Minneapolis. You can talk to people and geek out about all this stuff. It's awesome. But anyway, if you're not using Graphite and StatsD, you could be so much happier. Because as developers, you can just take StatsD, throw a call in for anything that you want to measure, and just set it and forget it. You don't have to set anything up ahead of time. As long as you can talk to the port where StatsD is answering, you can just throw data at it. And Josh is nodding, because of course they do all of this stuff at GitHub. And I don't know how many people in the room are actually using this stuff or its moral equivalent yet already. Okay, so some people in the room are, some people in the room are going to be, because this will make you so much happier. And I'm not giving you a pitch or selling you something here, because this is all open source, which means it's free except for all your time. And fortunately, the time of all of the people who have put time into making this stuff actually work. So definitely recommend checking this stuff out. And we did actually have, when I got there, we had Graphite installed. No one was using it because no one understood it. But, and I'm not the person who actually started using it. One of our developers started saying, hey, this might actually do something. And that same developer went and set up StatsD, as one does if one is a very smart developer who wants to get something set up immediately. It was not set up in a way that would survive the machine rebooting, let's just say. So I decided at one point that I was going to upgrade our Graphite and cut our StatsD over to something a little bit more repeatable, maintainable. Insert the bowl that you want there. The ops people in the room are going, uh-huh, and the developers in the room are going, but that makes things slower. And this is why development and ops should just be working together. But anyway, so, and there are some great features in the newer versions of Graphite that we didn't have and we really, really wanted. So, of course, I went immediately, since we use Chef, I went to go look at community cookbooks and then ran into some of our horrible technical debt, which is we're still in Chef 10. And I feel like there needs to be some sort of anonymous meeting for that. We haven't upgraded Chef anything past 10 point whatever it is, which means some of the stuff in the community cookbooks, it's all like Shelf. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we can't really use easily. There's some breaking changes there. And StatsD, on the other hand, that community cookbook is very Chef version agnostic, works fine. Also, we're using Nginx. So I ended up having to roll my own cookbook. And I'm one of those terrible people who's going to tell you that I wrote a cookbook that does Graphite and Nginx, and I can't give it to you yet because I need to decontextualize it and take out all of our us-specific crap before I can actually open source it. But it's on my increasingly long list of, I'm just not going to make any promises about that time-wise. But I can give you the cliff notes on how you can do it, which is, if you want to use Nginx, which you do, definitely use a virtual env. Graphite uses Django. We are actually a Django USD Python shop anyway, so that was no problem. So that's where some of the us stuff, I have some of our standard cookbook for our stuff glued into there. So it's like I have to decontextualize that. But don't ignore the dependencies, because nothing is going to work if you don't put them in there. And on the LTS that we're using, because we are conservative that way, as we do stick to the LTSs, I'm waiting. It's in beta. The next LTS isn't, you know, it's Trusty is in beta soon. And then I'm totally moving all of our stuff, because getting sick of, yeah. But anyway, so you definitely do need to go through a couple of packages in your cookbook. Honestly, you just install the Graphite stuff via pip, it'll be fine. Or, you know, be fancy. I used to be so like I would never install things with a package manager, and now it's like, NPM, fine, okay, throw that in the cookbook. And Bower, I will shell out and just make it do that. It's like, fine, I don't care. Anyway, so there's 3 pieces to Graphite. You do need all 3, though the Graphite web front end is the one that's kind of horrible, and there's a lot of replacements for it. So I would recommend looking at them. There's a Swedish guy, and I can't remember his name at this very moment, Odegaard, last name Odegaard something. I'll put it up on Twitter later, who has a really nice drop-in front end replacement. But the 2 pieces in the back end that you're going to care about are the time series data and the, it's the daemons that basically run to collect and aggregate that data. And you might start with, why do I need an aggregator? Okay, the aggregator is actually super useful because you can, if you have, say, a whole bunch of instances behind a load balancer of some sort, you can have all of your say, web server information or whatever, or a whole bunch of stuff about your application performance come from all of the servers together and then just get aggregated so that you can have this is individual servers, sure, you're not going to alert on those, I hope, but here is your overall app performance or whatever it is. And then you can point your Nagios at your Graphite, and it's wonderful, because you just tell it to alert whenever something bad is happening. A lot more configurable than something like NewRelic. Am I talking too fast? I always start talking too fast. Okay, so when I started moving over the StatsD and Graphite stuff, nothing was actually working correctly at first, which was very confusing. And I went and found John Gula's post about how exactly you look with TCP dump at this stuff. Very helpful. I found that I was not understanding some stuff in the config files about exactly which ports are the default, and you're nodding because you're like, yeah, I've dealt with that. The default ports, if you're using the aggregator, are not going to be necessarily what you expect, is the short version. So especially if you're trying to use an out-of-the-box config file, you might find that things are not exactly as you suspect or as you expect they'll be, but TCP dump is your friend. We'll solve that for you. This one, I call it carbon aggravator because it made me so angry. Okay, so there had been a pull request for months that somebody hadn't taken to fix the documentation for this. So in a point release, who here thinks that it's a great idea to have a breaking change that means that if you bring your old config file over and you don't have a new setting set, the default is flipped from what it used to be? This is like a Hulk smash sort of thing. So yeah, no data was coming in whatsoever from our aggregator because it changed so that you now have to explicitly tell it that if you're using the aggregator, you actually want everything that comes to the aggregator. So watch out for gotchas like that. Again, this is falls through the cracks. It's a busy open source community. Somebody actually found this problem already, and before I found the problem, somebody found it and put in a pull request specifically to fix the documentation around that. And I found that pull request after I saw the problem, and I was like, con. One thing that was really useful to me, you might look at the description of this and think like, I'm not fancy, I don't have a Graphite cluster, what are you talking about? It was actually really useful because there's a utility in this excellent open source project that allows you to, if you're in this use case, which is you have Graphite, it's running in one place, then you cut over to someplace else, but you have to restart all of your, your WSGIs and collecties and everything else to get the data to start going to the new place, because they're going to hold on to whatever they looked up that hostname as being at the time when the process started, right? So when you go to cut over, there's going to be this very sad hole in your data that fills you with sadness because some of the data was going to the old server for a period of time. So how do you just go grab the ones that you want from the old server and shove them into the new server? Whisper fill. Excellent tool. Again, this is weird little corner case stuff until you actually start to do this stuff, which I recommend you should because it's awesome, and this will save you a lot of aggravation. Okay, so Carbonate is what that tool is called. Okay, and this is a good example. If you need to make the business case for why you're going to spend any of your time doing this and how is it actually going to help your organization for you to have some chart, the purpley blue one is the traffic the previous day, and the green one shows what happened on the day. Come on in. You're welcome. You can come around that way. You don't actually have to walk in front of the speaker. When I peeked in here earlier, I was like, so latecomers have to walk in front of the speaker. I'm not going to go in there. I'm like, that's going to be terrible. But it's actually fine. So if you look at the normal traffic, and then you look at what was going on with one of our unnamed clients who has some other third party doing some stuff to their website, it was pretty clear on our monitors, because, being startup-y, we have to have things up on monitors. It was pretty clear something very, very, very bad happened right at 2 a.m. And it was very obvious as the day started going on that our traffic was not what it should have been coming from that client. Like, we were basically turned off on some of their, web properties. How? That looks like a deployment, doesn't it? Somebody rolled some code that took us off or broke us. This was obvious and easy for our client success people to look at, to send over as proof, to have, of course, the third party, the vendor say, oh, well, we do our deployments at 2 a.m., guess we can't fix it. For the our client and theirs to say, diagram, hell no, you're fixing this. And it's quite obvious that they fixed it. And this is the sort of thing where if you can't generate things like this about your business, and maybe you can from whatever tools you have, but again, these are open source tools that only cost all of your time. And if you can generate stuff like this, just a time shift of this is what it was today, and this is what it was yesterday. It makes it so easy to explain why resources, or what happened, or that something happened. Because really, do you want to tail a log file and then have your client success people go take a screenshot of that? It's like, no. You can see there's a problem, but it's so much more useful when there's something that you can give in an easily visually digestible format. And this is straight out of Graphite. So, okay, so what are all the exciting things we want to do next? Well, in this exciting future world, hello Fluid folks, in this exciting future world where we have money and hire more me's, or at least, give me more time or whatever, that happens, right? Free time is something that, can be purchased or, acquired in a startup acquisition. Yeah, right. I really want to do some stuff with Logstash, and I should have thrown a Kibana graphic on here that I didn't, but I want to do some stuff with Logstash and Kibana because I think that will solve some of our problems. That we have a lot of stuff going into Graphite, but there's other logs that we pretty much just don't do anything with or don't even really look at, and we cycle our EC2 instances, and so those logs just kind of go to the log heaven in Amazon's Bitbucket. And there's stuff that we probably could get out of them that I haven't even put any time into thinking about. We had Splunk once when I got there, and they were trying to be PCI compliant. And then I got us to PCI compliance, and then they were like, we've pivoted, now we don't care about that. And I was like, excellent, because it's snake oil anyway. I'm sorry, but seriously, if your PCI compliance checks don't notice that there was a developer who opened up a bunch of stuff to a production database for his Comcast cable modem IPs, but I find that after the PCI scans are all over, I really don't think your scans are doing anything, just saying. But anyway, so I did actually set up the Nagios API, which is super awesome, and just haven't had any time to do anything with it. But this is what places like, I think GitHub uses Hubot, but there are a number of places that use, I think Etsy uses the Nagios API pretty extensively to let their chat bots do things like set something into downtime. So that would be better. And again, I installed it and just haven't had any time to do anything with it because, well, and then there's also some really interesting Etsy tools that do anomaly detection that I've been kind of doing the pressed up looking at the puppy in the window thing for a while, and I'm really hoping I have some time in the coming months to try out Skyline and Oculus, because I think those are pretty interesting and cool. And so then you're kind of saying, okay, you've told us all about this part and this part and this part of the elephant, and you're like, what do you actually think is the ideal monitoring solution? And I guess the answer for that is there is not one right answer. I've told you some of the things that we've done and some of the places that they were good and some of the places that they didn't really help or went wrong. And the things that we found the most helpful are a solution that actually finds your real problems. Because if you're going to have some sort of wacky locking situation with your database, but you have nothing that's telling you you have that situation, then you're going to see, and we did have a bunch of alerts going off, but it looked like HBase was being slow, and therefore it was leading to some checks taking longer than they should, which is, and that had been happening lately, and so we assumed it was a false alarm. That's the sort of thinking that sort of woolly-headed thinking doesn't get you anywhere. So your checks really should find your real problems. You only want actionable alerting, right? Again, or you're going to be like the individuals I talked to who their solution was to turn their phone off between 11 and 7. And I'm like, well, that is a solution. I don't think it solves the problem your organization wants you to solve. But if you only have, if the creepy PagerDuty voice only talks to you after you miss the app and you miss a text message, and then you get the phone call from the creepy PagerDuty voice, and you're like, oh God, I'm awake. But at least it's something that you can solve. Then you're not as full of rage. And we want to be less full of rage. And also, one place that we're not really perfect yet is, I felt really terrible. One of our developers said, what are these acknowledgement mails I'm getting from Nagios? How do I do that? And I was like, oh, I'm a terrible person. So again, I think the Nagios API thing is going to be a lot better, because that'll be like a go into your chat and say, yes, I know this is down, or I'm going to just put this in maintenance, as opposed to going to the interface from 1912 and clicking on your buggy whip or whatever it is. Yes?
With Nagios alerts and other alerting methods, what about using brokered events?
I assume you're going somewhere with that I don't know what that is, so can you go into more detail?
So if you get an alert, you have your standard escalation, but before you even get escalated, a broker event is fired to repair it before it even gets to you.
Sure, absolutely. I think we should get that. Do you have that?
It's brokered events are part of Nagios.
Yeah, I just haven't done anything with it yet, but I'm going to go look at it now. Thank you. But anyway, so that's a good example. I think there are probably a lot of other things that we could do to improve this situation, but it's like iterating towards sucking less, right? It's like, at least now, when somebody tries to DDoS a Facebook app, we don't wake up in the middle of the night to say, look, someone is trying to buy tickets, fantastic, or whatever it is. And again, then making things self-healing is way better. There actually are a bunch of things that we're doing in terms of, I didn't go into as much detail as maybe I could have about the intersection between Graphite and Nagios, but a lot of our stuff that actually pages, only pages if Graphite shows a trend that is not optimal over a defined period of time. So instead of getting those one-off, like, you're going to be paged because something spiked, but by the time you even look at it, the problem has solved itself. Instead of that, we have to see a sustained trend of a problem. If it's a sort of thing where a spike might happen, but a sustained trend is a real problem, then those alerts are only, they only go to PagerDuty if Graphite actually says that this is, you know, sustained, or it's not just a one-off situation. But anyway, so yeah, we are using, I mentioned PagerDuty, we are actually using all these things. So if the question is, what is the right thing? The answer is, use as many things as you like. We are actually literally using all these things in production at in one place or another. We were paying for NewRelic. We weren't really using the error analysis stuff enough to justify the cost at the time for us. Your mileage may vary. Sentry does very similar stuff, which is to say, if you have application level errors, it's an open source project that does very similar stuff. It's pretty easy to set up, pretty configurable. I haven't actually done a lot with it. One of our developers set it up, and that's on my to-do list of, that one is one of our few remaining special Snowflake boxes. That was actually the place that the StatsD server was running in a screen session, and I was like, ixnay. But yeah, that's no longer on the Sentry box. But so that one is pretty useful. We actually still have some NewRelic dashboards up just on like the free light plan because they're really pretty. And Ganglia is just on our EMR cluster, just because it's actually really useful if you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on with, like, say, your cluster memory. It's nice to have that visualization. We really only use the CloudWatch alerts for our auto-scaling. And there's probably other things we could use it for, but I feel like Nagios and Graphite kind of fill that gap for us. But again, your mileage may vary. MMS, we look at them, but the alerting off of it is really not as configurable as you would want it to be. Even though I look at them, but I've just turned up a lot of the stuff that we're alerting off of from the Nagios NRPE plugin. If you're not doing any kind of external checks, like say you're in EC2, it would be really good for you to have something outside EC2 that tells you whether or not everything is copacetic. So we use Pingdom for that. It's not free, but it's not expensive. And we just have that tell PagerDuty if, hello, it looks like your everything is down. You know, just it's a very like simple, you know, it's an HTTP sort of check. I didn't talk really about Collecti, but Collecti is what we're using for system level metrics. You could be using something like Munin, but that's so heavyweight. And StatsD is really more of like a, in your code, you throw timers and events and, you know, whatever counters at it. Having your StatsD data, your Collecti data is very host-based, and so really that's where the aggregator comes in, because it's a lot more useful to look at that stuff in aggregate than it is necessarily for you. Depending, again, your mileage may vary on your infrastructure. For our infrastructure, we don't spend a lot of time caring about individual hosts so much. I mean, what is it? Is it Michael Ducey who says, with Chef, that says, you want a herd of cattle, you don't want pets? So we don't really have so many pets anymore. And the time series graphing stuff in Graphite, super valuable. Then Nagios checks Graphite, and then we have NRPE stuff going out on like specific, there are specific things that we care about on individual hosts. For example, if you're running database stuff, you probably care about what your primary database server is doing, and if it's experiencing any ailments, you may want to know about those as soon as possible. And then PagerDuty, it's like, don't hate the pager, but it does, I think it does a really good job. And speaking as someone who used to, and I see at least one person in the room who used to be in an on-call rotation that I would roll by hand, PagerDuty is so much better. It's like, especially because there's really nobody like discussing who's going to be forced to be on Thanksgiving this year or whatever. PagerDuty just decides everything, and then you go trade with each other. And there's no like, you have this many points of holiday time from before, because nobody wants to deal with that. But anyway, so yes, this is kind of a scary graph because we are using all the things, but if you notice how few of them are actually waking us up, it actually isn't so terrible. It's not bad to have more visibility. Just don't be tempted to add arrows from every single one of those to the thing that wakes you up, because then you just have alert fatigue and you're not going to actually pay attention to any of them. And then you're back to the just turn your phone off situation, is what we found at least. So, because it was certainly a time when NewRelic was going right to pager duty, it was like, wake up, acknowledge, wake up, resolve, go back to sleep. Nobody wants to do that. So yeah, so that's kind of the stuff that I want to talk about, and that's a lot of me talking in a row, so I really want to hear from you guys, which is why this isn't a question section. This is a discuss, because I know that everyone is here because you have some sort of interest in monitoring, or you just want to be nice to me and show up at my really, really far away room. I'm really amazed that so many people showed up at my really far away room. It's great. Alina's like, yes, that's why I'm here. But anyway, so I want to hear from you. Like, what do you have to say about monitoring?
So if you had a bunch of money to play with, because that previous slide, I mean, it looks like a lot of previous experiences I've had. And there's a point where like, yes, this is very useful, but I feel bad for the next person. So if you had a bunch of money to play with, I would imagine you'd at least looked at some of these tools. What would you look at as potential replacements for pieces?
For like 8 of those?
Yeah.
I really think you can do a lot of this with, I'm going to say it, Nagios, Graphite, Stats. If I had to pick just a few of these to keep, like if this was some sort of Sophie's choice, I would pretty much just keep PagerDuty, Nagios, Graphite, StatsD, and something else like CollectD or Collectable, I don't know, something that feeds it. And obviously NRPE, but that's just part of Nagios. Probably a good idea to have something doing your external uptime checks, but you don't have, you could roll that yourself if you had to. But I would probably keep this piece, or if you wanted to outsource it, a vendor that uses something very similar to this piece. If you wanted to go pay somebody some money, I would look at Opsmatic, I would look at Datadog. They're doing some really good stuff in this space. A lot of those, we don't really need them. They're sort of useful for some use cases. The developers would disagree violently about Sentry, by the way. So if you actually care about your application performance, you probably want to have something like Sentry. Things like NewRelic is nice, and I like it, and you should at least look at it if you're interested in this sort of thing. It's really focused on things like the real user monitoring. It kind of has displays kind of like what we get from our CDN. Like we use Akamai, and they have some great displays that show you things of like your, this many people in Brazil are looking at your, and you're just like, do I care? Someone probably cares. It's kind of like the stuff you can get out of Google Analytics, where you're to the point where, do I want to watch that little line do this? I don't know. Someone probably cares about that. But yeah, I think of all of these, I think the most interesting and important thing on this slide is Graphite. And if you're only going to look at one of these, I suggest looking at Graphite. And then when you look at Graphite, like Graphite is a gateway drug to StatsD. You're not going to be able to say no to StatsD at that point, just because it's so nice. So, but yeah, there are some, like I said, I named a couple of them. And NewRelic is good too. There are some good companies doing stuff in this space. So if you're not Etsy, who's a monitoring company who also sells tea cozies, that's what they, self-styled, I didn't say it, they did. But if you're not a company like that and you want to put this in someone else's hands, at least look at NewRelic, Datadog, Opsmatic, I would say are good ones to look at. Is there one giant tool that solves all of these problems? I wouldn't want it if there were, because if all of us are here because we like to tinker in some way, and you know perfectly well that there's no one tool that does everything well. There are a lot of one tools that do many things moderately okay, but part of my whole composability argument and why I'm in the VI camp is that I don't actually want a giant tool that is also a Lisp operating system. Like, I do actually care about being able to tune individual pieces to my individual needs. So is there one tool? I think you'll find that those people who provide you one solution are using a lot of these tools. Yes?
So I come more from the infrastructure side. So my question is, should we be thinking in terms of, dumping direct to StatsD, or what else should we be doing? Other than the conventional, we got a log file. We can parse our log file.
Well, first of all, make sure you have water monitoring under the floor in your data center for when your water-cooled doors start leaking. That's my experience in the infrastructure side. Munir's like, yes. If you're not using something like the Collecti Graphite Nagios path, you would find that infrastructure. Sorry.
Put in my product to make people
To appeal to the infrastructure side.
to people who are doing the monitoring.
Everything is moving away from individual host things. Like the individual host check is basically dead. People care about making sure that their service is available. And being able to measure service availability by whatever you want to be able to measure it by, I think is what people care the most about. So for example, NewRelic's pricing around the individual host thing was making me crazy for a while, and that's one of the things that we just couldn't deal with that. And they changed that, and they do now have like pricing for this kind of org and pricing for that kind of org. But don't focus things around individual hosts, because so many people now are doing scaling stuff where the number of servers they have at any given time is going to change. So putting your stuff around individual hosts, it's kind of like the, shoot, who was it? I want to say it's one of those vendors that does HPC queuing stuff, that they wanted to charge us for the number of cores in the servers that were going to be using the thing. And I was like, really? So now we have to go around to all of the servers and count all the cores. And it was like, how do we count the VMs? And oh, it was horrible. Right, exactly. So don't think about that so much. Things are moving a lot away from the individual hosts, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
That helps,
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So I'm in a situation, I have a startup, we've been operating, went live a year ago with no customers.
Okay.
And no problem with monitoring whatsoever, everything works perfectly. Now we're getting customer traction and we're starting to work up, so I'm here. So which is in, and we're at a place where it's not gonna be huge off the scale, and I need to either decide to go with one of these organizations that does it all, or to stand up all these.
You don't need all of them. You don't need all of them.
Right, but just that tree that you looked on the right side there. So how would you compare the choice in terms of time versus money?
It completely depends on whether or not you're already paying an ops person to be in your organization. Because if you don't have an ops person, you're probably going to find this to be an impenetrable maze of sad. So Jen's giving me the yes look. Yeah, you might find that this is the sort of thing that is a little bit, I don't know, it might take up more time from somebody who has never touched the stuff than you're willing to spend. I think part of the reason that for my startup this made perfect sense is because they needed an ops person for other reasons related to their Mongo needs and other things anyway. And then once I was there, they were like, excellent, you could also do all of these things that you already know how to do. Well, I knew how to do some of this stuff already. Some of the other stuff was new to me. But so you might at least, you might want to at least look at something like NewRelic's free tier is a good place to start.
Okay.
Just because that gives you some host level stuff and as well as some application level stuff.
Okay.
I would at least, yeah, I would look at NewRelic. Yes.
Have you ever looked at Econga?
Econga, I have not heard of it.
Nagios has a stale development about 3 or 4 years ago, and
Oh, Isinga. Yes. Am I pronouncing it wrong? That's probably my problem. I was going with Isinga, but Econga, okay.
NRP capable, fully
Yeah.
backwards compatible, the better
Yeah.
UI.
I have very few opinions about the UI just because, you know, how much time do you actually spend looking at it? But if you did it right, right? Yeah, that was the slide I had earlier about the guy who wrote the plugin for HBase monitoring. He was an Econga, if that's how we say it, user. And yeah, all the plugins are compatible. So that's definitely worthwhile. I haven't looked at it just because, I have only so much time. And if Nagios is working just fine for me, I don't necessarily need to replace it. But for someone starting out fresh, they might find that that's really worthwhile.
Put a lot of aggregation into it, and then use the dashboard of it to actually display metrics.
Maybe, though. At least my counter to that would be you should at least look at some of the Graphiter, I think is what the Graphite dashboard replacement is called. At least look at what Graphite can do because it's actually really, it has some, you can, if you thought that you would never use integrals again after school, you are wrong. You get to use them in Graphite. It's fantastic. See, that's a selling point for people in the room.
See, this was 3, 4, 5 years ago when I didn't have this stuff.
Nice. Yes.
It's a good point about Sentry,
Mhm.
particularly for operations people, because it's an application monitoring thing. It looks at inside Java one application, so it predicts in advance problems that occur versus Nagios and these things that sort of catch things after.
Exactly.
So your developers are really going to want to do that, even though
Yeah.
it doesn't integrate
Yeah.
well with the other monitoring systems.
Yeah, Sentry is really good for that. And someone also mentioned something about how do we move away from just parsing log files. That's where I want to go with Logstash, because I think Logstash and Kibana is kind of one of the choices people are using. Josh is giving me this nod, so I want to hear from you as to what you're actually using. But you're not going to tell me what you're using?
No, you don't want to hear.
Are you just parsing log files?
No, it's complicated.
That's what you tell Facebook.
See, I've actually used Elasticsearch and Logstash and Kibana. And
Yeah.
it's a little uphill battle, but once
Yeah.
it's up, it's fantastic.
We just started doing stuff with Elasticsearch, and boy, that is a little bit, again, you probably want to have somebody who really wants to dig into that.
You have to run 3 or 4 of the instance on a single machine just
Yeah.
because of garbage collecting.
Oh, Java, how I don't love you. Yes.
No one has mentioned app dynamics, but
Hmm.
I've used it, that's what I was looking at.
Okay.
okay. Yeah, we've used it for a while, and if you have a Java application, and it's very good because it not only monitors the operating system level
Mhm.
stuff, so you can look at GC, and it also hooks up to JVM monitor thing called JMX.
Mhm.
So you can, if you expose your different stats to JMX, it'll actually monitor it and give you graphs and stuff.
And this was called App what?
App Dynamics.
App Dynamics. So,
Interesting because it actually does dynamic monitoring set thresholds.
Mhm.
It detects something is like going anonymous, it starts collecting a lot more data.
Mhm.
And then you can review it through your web monitor.
yeah.
I think there's another application called Log Dynamic that does
Yeah.
parses log stuff.
And there is that little bit of a split between, do you want to spend a lot of time focusing on your application monitoring? And some of you are like, that's what we care about. And then what do you care about in terms of your overall system health? And you're like, the system could be totally on fire as long as our application's working. And it's like, well, except that the system being totally on fire might eventually, make your application fall over. So I would say just, like the Etsy folks say, measure everything as much as you possibly can. Just don't have every single thing you're measuring wake you up in the middle of the night, because then you'll just hate yourself for measuring everything. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? I don't even know how we're doing in time. Yes?
Exploring the space question, are there any other time series components that you recommend?
The one that I've spent the most time with is Graphite, but the time series, like the back end for that, like the Whisper database, there's some talk of replacing the one in Graphite with something called Carbon instead of Whisper. But then there's other talk of maybe keeping both of them as choices. I don't really know. But yeah, if Whisper kind of gets you down, which it's not perfect. I mean, who among us is using computers and think that they're perfect in any way? Yeah. But Whisper's not perfect, but Carbon, not Carbon, what is it called? I can't even remember the name for it now. There's talk of a replacement. No, it's not coming to me. But there's talk of a replacement for that. But Ceres, that's what it is. CERES. So is the potential replacement for the Whisper time series database. Other complete packages, I don't know. I'm sure that the internet would be happy to inform you more about this. Obfuscurity, Jason Dixon, is the person who's running Monitorama, where I'm going to give with all of your excellent feedback, hopefully updated version of this talk in May. And he would probably have a lot of interesting things to say on that subject. I know that when I was trying to teach myself Graphite, like I started noticing I had about 4 tabs open to his blog with various Graphite tips, and I was like, who is this guy? It's like, yeah.
What's his name?
Jason Dixon, Obfuscurity on Twitter, writes some very interesting stuff about Graphite and other monitoring topics. It's very well worth following /reading/whatever. How are we doing on time? Oh gosh, we're over time. I'm really sorry to the people who are trying to come in after us. Thank you all so much for coming. Wonderful questions. I will be here. I'll be here all week. Enjoy the buffet.